All right, this video is focused on writing your paper in Philosophy 220, our first paper assignment, focused on whether you would pursue cryogenics to possibly prolong your life. So you are to imagine you're in a similar situation as Kim Suozi. I think that's how you say your last name. Don't quote me on that. Um, you have an inoperable brain tumor. You're going to die. Uh, are you going to attempt to prolong your life through cryogenics, freezing your head or whole body? Now, I want to emphasize that this paper, although it is meant to uh, have an argument where you argue for your view or opinion, that belief or opinion needs to be rooted in our assigned reading. So I don't want you to just say, well, I wouldn't do cryogenics because I think it's a waste of money. That's not the kind of argument that I would like you to make. Your argument is based on the text. So it has to relate to and be rooted in a theory of personal identity. So, for instance, if you accepted soul theory, you know, you might then say, look, I'm not going to pursue cryogenics because I believe that when I die, my soul leaves my body. And in that case, it doesn't matter if you try to resuscitate my brain, it's not me. Or there's no way, that your brain is you. You are your soul, and at death, your soul leaves your body. And you could support that description by using the Perry article, Dialogues on Personal Identity and Immortality, where Sam Miller gives arguments about the soul. So you have to use our assigned readings, and your paper has to have a motive and thesis. Now, the motive is the problem that you seek to address, right? And in some sense, the problem is fairly clear. Should you or would you pursue cryogenics? But there's a different way to frame the problem. It could be that you think, well, it would only make sense to pursue cryogenics if your mind can be uploaded to a computer, but you don't think that's possible. And so for that reason, you don't think cryogenics is worth pursuing, right? So there's different ways to frame the problem, frame the motive. And you want to make that clear in your paper. What's your motive? That's what you want to make clear. And how is your thesis responding to that motive? So let's just look at the paper instructions for a moment here. In this paper, to answer the core question, whether you would do what Kim did, you must connect your response to a theory of personal identity that we have studied in this class. So really, we've talked about three theories: soul theory, psychological continuity, and then biological continuity. So you are your body, right? So you have to justify your answer using the philosophical text that we have read. These materials, the materials available for you to use in this paper are the following. Only these articles, okay? A Dying Young Woman's Hope in Cryonics in the Future, that's a New York Times article. A Dialogue on Personal Identity and Immortality, Descartes' Meditations, Computing, Machinery, and Intelligence, The Chinese Room, The Quality Problem, What It's Like to Be a Bat, The Self in Chinese Buddhism, and then the Alcor website, which describes the process of cryogenics and also sort of addresses commonly asked questions and objections. So although I didn't assign you to read that, you might want to find out more information about how cryogenics works, right? So I have the Self in Chinese Buddhism here because you could plausibly say, and you were open to say this, that you don't think there is a self. And in that sense, if you don't believe there is a self, then there's very little reason to preserve your identity using cryogenics. But even then, there's still big questions, right? If there is no self, what exactly is there even a you? Why are you even taking this class if there is no self, right? So that position will, of course, face its own problems. And that's another key part of the assignment, right? Your paper should consider an objection. So a very strong objection to your position, and that's outlined in the rubric, and we're going to turn to that in a couple minutes. So your paper must make use of at least 3 of the sources listed above, right? So undoubtedly you need to make use of the New York Times article because you need to describe the situation, right? Further, that article contains a good amount of technical information, right? So you might think, oh, well, I would pursue cryonics if cryogenics, cryonics, I think those two terms are interchangeable. I would pursue that if the technology was farther along, because I believe in the psychological continuity theory of identity, and I believe as long as my mind survives, I survive, but I wouldn't do it because I don't believe they could actually bring people back. If that's your argument, you would certainly want to make use of the information in the New York Times article and the information on the LCOR website, because they're going to try to refute some of those concerns on the website. And further, you'd want to make use of personal identity and immortality or the Dupre article. Actually, you can also use the Dupre article. I forgot to list that, and I will adjust these instructions. And you'd want to describe the psychological continuity theory of identity. So you have to use at least 3 of these sources. You can use more, you can use all of them. I mean, you have to be judicious though, right? Because you can't explain all of these sources in one paper. You only have 1,350 to 1,700 words. It's about 5 or 6 pages. So what you want to think about is, what can you reasonably cover? And a technique to avoid, I think, which is what people will be drawn to, is to say something like, there are 3 theories of personal identity: soul theory, bodily criteria, psychological continuity. In this paper, I will discuss these 3 views and how they apply to cryonics. That's not going to be a good approach for this paper. You're not going to be able to adequately consider each theory, describe them using the text, and consider problems with each one. That's maybe a 30-page paper. You only have 5-6 pages to write this paper. 6.5 pages, I think, at the max, with 1,700 words. So, you have to be focused. Choose one theory to focus on to justify your answer. Maybe you think that there's no way to know whether you survive. That answer still has to be rooted in one of our theories of identity. So here are some sample theses. Because I accept the psychological continuity theory of personal identity, I would in fact seek to preserve my brain so that the connectome could be recreated in another medium, say in silica. As long as some entity out there has my memories and my experiences, I believe I have survived. Okay, so in this paper, you would need to explain the theory of personal identity, explain cryonics, and how it is that you see yourself having your mind recreated, say in silica, so a silicon brain, or maybe in a computer medium, right? Because computer chips are made of silica or contain silicon. So you could say, look, I believe my mind can be uploaded, and here's why, and here's, I'm going to draw on Turing's argument to say there's very little reason to think a computer can't become conscious. So you just upload my mind to the computer. Voila, I've survived, according to the theory of personal identity. So if you were pursuing the thesis in example A, you'd want to use the New York Times article, the article from Perry about personal identity, and then also you'd need to use the Turing article. And you'd also want to pose an objection. So maybe you could draw the objection from Perry, or you could also draw the objection from Searle, who questions the ability of a computer to recreate consciousness in some way. Then you have this alternate thesis, B. Because of the technical problems surrounding freezing and preserving the human brain, I would not attempt to freeze myself at death. I believe I accept the bodily criteria and identity, and unless my brain is totally and successfully preserved, I would not survive. So this is a very different thesis, right? And again, you would then engage a few different texts. You would want to look at the Suozzi article again from the New York Times. Of course, every paper is going to need to make use of that. But you might also want to then draw on the Weinraub arguments about how she is her body and why she thinks that, and focus on some of the technical difficulties discussed in the New York Times article of preservation, and perhaps then take a look at the LCOR website. What do they claim about preservation? Why don't you accept those claims? So then again, that would be an objection to your position. So your paper must make a reasoned argument in support of your position and make use of evidence to justify your position. So, the evidence in this sense is all available in the readings, right? So, some evidence for not pursuing freezing your brain is the idea that, well, mapping the connectome would take half the computing power in the world. Doesn't seem realistic, and so you don't think it's worth pursuing. Your paper must also consider an objection, as we've discussed. And the objection itself should be rooted in the text. We've read a lot of objections to these various positions. They all have problems. So how does a particular problem apply to the cryonics situation? And you should also include some personal elements. Why do you want to survive, or why do you not want to survive? Why do you think it's worth it to prolong your life in the face of terminal illness, or not even trying to do that, right? So you might have your own thoughts on that. You must make use of proper in-text citation throughout the paper. You should use MLA citation practices for this paper. There is a citation guide on D2L to help you with in-text citation and creating a works cited. And each article in D2L, where you go to download the article, contains citation information. So a required element of this paper is a peer review process. Well, you will be put into groups of 3 or 4, and there is a guided peer review worksheet. Now, how do I know that you've engaged in peer review? I don't know with certainty, but one element that's gonna hopefully get you to engage in peer review is that your paper must include a cover letter that reflects on changes that you made in light of the peer review process. Your cover letter should constitute at least one double-spaced page and address at least the following. So the cover letter does not count as part of your official word count. So the cover letter, I'm just not going to count that in the word count. So you could have a 1,700 word paper and then a 300 word cover letter if you want. Okay. So, and you should write it as a letter. Don't just do bullet points addressing each one of these things. So be sure to format your cover letter as a letter to your reader, beginning with "Dear Reader." If you do not include a cover letter, your paper will be penalized with a 5% reduction in grade. So if you're having problems getting together with your group, contact me. I'll put you in a different group, or I will provide feedback on your draft. Okay, so here's dates about the submission time. But the most important thing is these keys about the format. Let's take a look at the rubric for a second. So the rubric is based on the philosophical writing lexicon. However, I decided to make how I'm using that lexicon even more explicit by creating this rubric focused on this particular paper topic. So this is a little experiment I'm doing, see how people respond to it. Thesis. The paper contains a clear and concise thesis statement which clearly states the student position on cryogenic freezing and their main reason for it. So your main reason for or against it, right? So your main reason that you would go for it is that you believe in psychological continuity theory of identity, perhaps, or maybe your main reason against it is you just think it's not technically feasible. Whatever, it has to be clearly stated. Further, the same position is maintained throughout the paper. So you don't change positions halfway through. Maybe that sounds comical to you, but you'd be surprised on how many student papers I read end up radically changing position over the course of the paper because the student has begun to think more about the problem, and as a result of that thinking process, change their position. Context, orientation. The paper explains the relevant issues in a way that someone unfamiliar with the course material could easily understand and follow. So what is cryonics? Who is Kim Suosi? What is the problem supposed to be? What does it have to do with you? What are you imagining? All that should be made clear. The paper makes ample use of evidence. So these, we're focusing on the 5 category, which would mean at the highest level. So obviously that's what we all want to achieve, right? So almost all claims that require evidential support are in fact supported, and the evidence is analyzed and explained. The paper considers a strong objection to their position or argument. The objection is rooted in the text. So it's not some fanciful objection or something that no one's actually said. It's an actual objection that comes from our reading. Because each, as I've said, each position has its problems that we've looked at. The student explains and defines keywords and phrases using evidence from the text. So, you know, you've defined what psychological continuity is, or you've defined what soul theory is, using what Descartes says, or what Perry says in three dialogues concerning immortality and personal identity. Citation. The student makes proper use of in-text citation for all evidence appealed to in the paper. The student has also correctly formatted works cited page at the end of the paper. Okay. Last thing I just want to hit on is I really encourage everyone to read that GAIPA Breaking into the Conversation paper. I think that's a great thing for beginning writers to read about how you should relate yourself to existing authors, either agreeing, disagreeing, nuancing their position. I think many students get a lot out of that article. I know I myself got a lot out of that article. I don't think I read it until I was in graduate school. So I think it's just a great way to conceive of writing a paper. You're in a conversation with these scholars. So if you're in a conversation with, you know, Gretchen Wyrob or Sam Miller, or you're in a conversation with Descartes, why are you going to accept what he says about the soul or reject it? So that's why you want to use evidence to describe what they say, so that you can engage with their reasons and positions. I'm looking forward to reading everybody's paper. I'm excited to see what people have to say about this problem and what they think about cryonics and freezing their brain or head. It's a curious question, but I think it's going to make for a great paper topic. So I look forward to reading these papers.